So raise your hand if you've ever traveled anywhere. Cool, that's a lot of people in this room. Now leave your hand up, or raise it back up again. If you've ever traveled abroad. Again, a lot of people in this room. And in 2017, over 87 million Americans traveled abroad, a number which reflects a growing phenomena in which international travel is becoming significantly easier, cheaper, and more accessible to individuals around the world. Now, if you've ever traveled abroad, or even if you've just traveled somewhere that's very different than your home, I want you to close your eyes for a second, and I want you to try to think about, what did you do? What did you see? What did you taste? What types of people did you meet? What were your overall impressions of this country or place? And are they different than what they were before you went there? Now, this might get a little bit more difficult, but I want you to leave those eyes closed, and I want you to try to imagine what the people in this country or place might have thought about you. How'd you interact? What'd you wear? What'd you say? What language did you say it in? What were their overall impressions of you? Now, I'm sure that was a lot harder to imagine, right? Because when we travel, we always develop so many impressions. We might come home with a million new pictures, new ideas, new favorite foods, new levels of understanding, etc. But what we often forget to think about is what we've left behind. What impressions do we give about our homes, and are those impactful ones? Now, at this point, you may be wondering how this 18-year-old standing up here knows anything about international travel. And the reality is that young people like me are becoming increasingly more aware of our existence in a global world. A recent Gallup study found that roughly 27% of American teens have traveled abroad, a number that's significantly higher than what it was in previous generations. And as more young Americans are experiencing these global cultures, our understanding of ourselves, our country, and our increasingly interconnected world is expanding. For me, being an American was never something I thought about too much. It was never a distinct part of my identity, because when I thought about American pride, I thought about some of the most unfavorable parts of our shared culture, like guns and racism and obesity. But this past summer, I had an experience that would change my understanding of not only my world, but also my own national identity. This past summer, I lived in Indonesia on a State Department scholarship called National Security Language Initiative for Youth. And it's a bit of a mouthful. The National Security Language Initiative for Youth enables high school students to learn a critical language abroad. And my time in Indonesia was incredible in so many ways. I mean, trust me, I could go on for ages about my amazing host family, the delicious foods I ate, the insane Jakarta traffic. The insane Jakarta traffic, beautiful sights I saw, and people I met. But instead, I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about an interesting sensation I felt quite frequently during my time there, which was a responsibility. Responsibility to embrace my American identity and represent my home as I immersed and I learned in this new country and this new culture. Now, oddly, the place where I started to notice this role most was on my daily commutes to and from school. Now, in Jakarta, because of the spread of the city and the crazy traffic problems, commutes are quite long. My daily commute to and from school took about an hour and a half each way, and it involved a Gojek ride from my house to the train station, and then an insanely crowded train ride. That is a really embarrassing photo. And then another Gojek ride from the train station to my school. So in Indonesia, Gojek is essentially motorcycle Uber. In Jakarta, it's their most popular form of public transport, and it's how you get anywhere and everywhere. You simply tap a button on the app, and almost instantaneously, a motorcycle and its driver shows up right in front of your feet, and they take you to your destination. Now, I consider myself a pretty friendly person, but when you're in a completely new country, where a massive language barrier exists, it can be difficult to find the courage to interact with strangers like this every day. So, for my first couple Gojek rides, I played the part of the super quiet, almost nonverbal Indonesian woman. Now, I'm blessed with this somewhat racially ambiguous look where, at first glance, you might not see me as an outsider. And this tactic sort of worked, and I could have slipped into this place of complacency forever. But the amazing problem is that Indonesians are so friendly and so talkative. So even as we're winding through these little streets at 6 a.m., Gojek drivers almost always struck up a conversation with me. And at this point, I've been learning the language for a little while, but my basic language skills and comprehension could hold on for maybe a minute before I was forced to say, "Maaf Pak, saya nggak mengerti, saya orang Amerika," or "I'm sorry, I don't understand, I'm an American." And I was always a little embarrassed to let this cat out of the bag, per se, and admit to my Americanness because I loved the idea of blending in. But fortunately, this little line opened up a whole new world for me. Now, the admission to my Americanness was always met by a very similar response. First, the Gojek driver would whip his head around and stare at me while somehow maintaining full control of the vehicle and winding through cars left and right. And then they would express their shock. "But you don't look like an American," they would say in Indonesian. And I found myself explaining over and over again that my father was from Hong Kong and my mother was American. And quite frankly, these little moments became so beautiful and so common as it happened almost every day. They became so beautiful to me because I began to understand that for most of these Indonesian Gojek drivers, I was the very first American they had ever met. So like me, in the face of this new country and this new culture, they were full of stereotypes and misconceptions that I was helping to break down. It was an incredible feeling of mutual learning. I found myself explaining things about America that I had never even given much thought to, like how not all Americans are white, or how mixed-race couples like my parents were actually quite common, or how my government had invested in me to learn this language and about this culture because they care about Indonesia. And meanwhile, I was learning more than I had ever learned in a classroom before, in these little rides of 15 to 40 minutes, depending on traffic conditions. Together, we were reaching deeper levels of understanding that could only be achieved through little personal interactions like these. For instance, as I explained about my home and my culture, Gojek drivers were so eager to tell me about theirs, what region of the country they were from, what foods were the best there, all the slang words that I had to know. One Gojek driver even stopped to buy me his favorite breakfast so that I wouldn't be hungry before school. And I may not have realized it then, but these little moments I was experiencing almost every day perfectly encapsulated the beauty of citizen diplomacy, which is the idea that even us, a high school student and a Gojek driver, have the power to influence the relations of our nations on a citizen-to-citizen level. As we sat in hot traffic and chatted, I was learning an entirely new language and learning about a whole new culture, just as they were learning about a whole new country that was far, far away. And there was also an immense power in our interactions, because from both sides of the motorcycle, our worldviews were expanding. Our biases and misconceptions about each other's respective countries, cultures, religions, people, etc., were changing. I had the power to influence what this person, who I had only just met, thought about Americans simply through my eagerness to listen, learn, and share about the vast diversity of my home. So, why is this so important? Well, like I said before, I'm not the only American or the only young American who has traveled in pursuit of learning or engaging in a new culture. In fact, more and more of us are doing it each year. And what traveling does, whether that's traveling abroad or traveling to Chinatown, is it helps us see that there are a million things that divide us humans, whether that's race, religion, age, nationality, etc. But there's also a whole lot of things that connect us. My Indonesian family, friends, Gojek drivers, and me may have struggled through cultural and language barriers. But of course, we spoke a million common languages, like the language of food, or the language of laughter, or the language of a smile. And of course, like what I said before, when we travel, we always bring so much home. I certainly brought home a lot of Indonesia with me. If you talk to me anytime after the trip, you know. My friends and family certainly thought once or twice or all the time, boy, Kendra's big obsessed with Indonesia. And they're not wrong. But what I hope is that maybe I've cleared up the confusion for a couple people that, yes, Indonesia is more than just Bali. Or I've changed somebody's misconceptions about our world's largest Muslim country. Or I made somebody question what it means to be an American traveling abroad. I know I haven't changed our nation's ties with Indonesia in any tangible ways, but that's what's so beautiful and interesting about citizen diplomacy. Because if I talked to 30 people about the little things I brought home, the little quips, stories, food, language, etc., then maybe a few of those people were inspired enough to learn more about the country on their own, or try out the food, or maybe even go there themselves one day, and then the whole cycle would begin again. And like I also said before, when we travel, we also leave so much behind. And this is more difficult to understand, and it's impossible to imagine exactly what that is. But if we're conscious and aware of our impact on others' perceptions of our homes, then we can do our best to ensure that those are good and honest ones. I like to imagine that maybe some of the Indonesian Gojek drivers I had went home and they told their friends or their family about the American girl they had met that day and how she was learning Bahasa Indonesia. Maybe they'll remember that I'm from Philadelphia, and years down the road when they or somebody they know is traveling to the States, they'll think, I heard Philly's a pretty awesome place. So what I want to leave you with today is a challenge that I also hope to work on in my years to come. Next time you're traveling, I want to challenge you to think about what you want to leave behind. What types of impressions do you want to give about your home country, or your home city, or your home culture, and what do those mean to you? It can be little things, like saying thank you in the local language, or adhering to the greeting customs, or having a conversation in which you learn and you share. All of these little things will give the impression that you're thoughtful and you care, but you'll also be taking on the responsibility of representing your home to a few people. But trust me, these interactions with a few people are powerful. They're powerful for increasing our global coexistence and our human coexistence and our understanding on a small scale. Ultimately, I'm so proud to be an American, and I now try to embrace all the opportunities I can to share about the complexity of my culture while also learning about others. But like all of you sitting in this room, I'm also more than just an American. I'm a citizen of this vast world in which we live, and this understanding will continue to drive me outside of my comfort zone, seeking new experiences and new cultures, while never forgetting my roots and where I've come from. Thank you.